Yes. Welcome to the show is what's going on. I'm your host, Hugo Fernandez, and you're on LaGuardia WLGR, coming to you from New York, where it is 1 p.m. But reason I mention that is because our guest today comes to us from sunny Berlin. He's an old friend of mine who started out as in radio himself, went on to filmmaking, then poetry, then writing plays, novels, and now he finds himself as a expat satirist. C.J. Hopkins. Say hi, Chris.
Yeah, hi, Hugo.
There was a lot to say there. I put together.
Yeah, you already my background.
That's right. And I'm supposed to read this ahead of time because some of you may know when we sent out the post, I did mention that if you are undecided for the election, this may not be the show to watch before you go to the polls. And you should bring your critical thinking hats. But I'm going to read this out loud. It was sent by my station manager, Dr. Riccio. The views expressed in this episode of What's Going On are the guest's own and do not reflect those of LaGuardia Community College or CUNY. So fair warning. But yeah, like I said, I've known Chris for many, many years. And I've asked him to introduce himself to the audience, talk about himself. So why don't you tell us a little about your background, Chris?
Yeah, well, you kind of covered it in a nutshell. I started my writing career, such as it is, started in San Francisco, I guess, or in Miami a little earlier, but mostly in San Francisco, where I wrote a big stack of really bad poetry. And then my ex-wife, bless her, dragged me into the theater, back into the theater. And we left San Francisco, moved to New York City. I had a little theater company for a while and did a lot of experimental theater downtown on the Lower East Side and East Village and what have you. And did that for, I don't know, 5 years. And then I got lucky with one of my plays and won some awards at the Edinburgh Festival, and my playwriting international, and so that was nice, and so that happened for a while, and that was right around the time that I left the States. It's 2003, 2004. I had been bouncing around in Europe for a while and visited Berlin, and it really reminded me of San Francisco before the dot-com boom, which you remember. And I had been kind of itching to get out of the States for a couple of years, and so I thought, why not? I'll give Berlin a try, and here I am all these years later. You mentioned my novel. I've only written one. I've been meaning to write another one, but it's been kind of an exciting time in the world, and I haven't really had time to focus on it. But yeah, I kind of finished really the big thing that I wanted to do in the theater, the big thing to do in the theater a few years ago, and decided to try writing a novel. So I did that and wrote Zone 23. And that was right around, that came out 2016, 2017. It was right around the time the whole Trump phenomenon started. And it got me interested in politics. Actually, Bernie Sanders is the one that got me interested in politics again and drew me in. And that's when I started this political satirist gig that I've been doing for the last 4 years. I think that which brings us up to date.
Yeah. And when you say your satirist gig, it's consentfactory.com, right? Which is where you post. I don't know if you call it. Would you call it a blog?
You post. It's a blog.
Yeah, you post your essays, which it's hard to describe to people who've never read it. It's I don't know whether it's left of left or it goes so far left. Sometimes people think it's right. And by the way, I've got two of the anthologies here that we've got: the Trumpocalypse and War on Populism, which is this one's all right, fresh off the shelf, right? This is the second one.
That's right. Yeah,
So
the
this is
first one's 2016 and 2017, kind of the best of my essays, and the second volume, which just came out, is 2018 and 2019. Yeah, which kind of brings us up to where we are.
yeah. What was it about the Trump presidency that excited you to start writing the satire?
Well, as I said originally, it wasn't Trump.
Oh, it's Bernie.
Yeah, it was Bernie Sanders that kind of pulled me in. I'm sure we'll get into it in more depth, but I don't tend to get really engaged in electoral politics because I don't think it really achieves very much, and so I hadn't been very engaged. But suddenly, the first Bernie Sanders campaign in 2016 got my attention, and I started thinking, hey, great, there's a left populist that's actually running, and he's getting a huge amount of support. And so that sort of drew me into, paying attention to campaign politics, electoral politics again. And then, of course, what happened with Bernie happened,
Twice.
Yeah. Well, the second time was just kind of just sort of a sad repetition, of
The
the whole
first.
first. Yeah, exactly. And then came Trump, and like everybody else, I lived in New York for 15 years. You've lived and worked in the city for a long time. I mean, I thought of the man as a clown. In the beginning, I just felt like this is a joke, and I regarded it that way for a while. And I never thought that he had any chance of actually winning the election. And then he
Nor
did.
did he.
Yeah, nor did he, for that matter. And then he did, and shocked everybody and everything else that happened. What really drew me in, I guess, and kept me going with the satirist thing is not so much Trump, but it was the establishment's reaction to him winning the election and everything that has happened since.
And the media, which I think is one of your particular favorite targets, right? The
Yeah,
media's
absolutely.
response to it.
Absolutely. It's funny, 4 years later, there are some pieces coming out, some big important pieces that are coming out now. Glenn Greenwald just wrote a couple of pieces. Matt Taibbi just published a piece today. And people who are talking, people on the left of the political spectrum, who are talking about how scary it is, how frightening it is, what has happened in the United States, this merger of the democratic political establishment with the intelligence agencies, with the corporate media, which of course in the States are owned by, like 6 mega corporations or so. And just the overwhelming majority of the establishment, from the media to political figures themselves to the actual intelligence agencies, all kind of singing the same tune, like one big Goebbelsian keyboard instrument. And they're writing about it now. These stories are getting coverage now, but that's basically what I've been covering and satirizing for the last 4 years, because it started in 2016.
So, because it's funny, because the way you talk about it, I could see somebody looking at it and saying it's almost conspiratorial in the sense that, and I pick it up. My wife is a big Rachel Maddow fan and puts on MSNBC all the time and CNN. And I think one of the things that has shocked.
I'm so sorry to hear that. I said I'm so sorry to hear that. My sympathies.
Yeah, but I was going to say that it's because when I was a kid, I grew up on Concrete, and in fact, interestingly enough, you were a broadcast major before me, and which kind of got me into the notion of being a broadcast major. We studied with the same Dave Gravel. We studied with the same guy, and you were always brought up in those days to tell it flat. Not bring in your own ideas in reporting, and or try to be neutral about it. And when I watched that stuff, as is Fox News, these people have, it's obvious they're telling it their way, and I don't know exactly what happened. But and so then again, of course, the intelligence agencies and their concerns with things that maybe the administration is not concerned with. And who else did you have mixed up in the cabal? I forgot. But a lot of people are working together in this way, and I can appreciate why. But it's just that is a phenomenon in and of itself.
Well, yeah, I'll give you my whole spiel if you want, but hold up my book again.
You may have which one? For shameless self-promotion, the Trump apocalypse.
Yeah, that happened, but it's the other one. Yeah, it's the other one. Yeah, it's you just asked, you just said I don't know what happened. Well, Trump happened, and Brexit happened. And not just Trump and Brexit, but you got a lot of, right-wing populist parties rising up in Europe. And so here comes my spiel. I mean, basically what happened, Hugo, is, in 1989, the Soviet Union dissolved, or during the early 90s, right? At that point, we entered a historical phase that we're really kind of still only at the beginning of. Right? When the Soviet Union dissolved, the last, outside ideological adversary to capitalism disappeared. Right? And at that point, we became a global capitalist world. And we really haven't gotten our heads around it yet. We still think in terms of nations and competing nations and, and political parties, Democrats and Republicans, but we're living in one big global capitalist world. Where all of our economies are interdependent, and it's one ideological system, right? What's been happening since the early 90s is global capitalism, because it doesn't have an external adversary anymore. There is the Cold War's over. There's no more, fighting the Soviet Union. What it's been doing is sort of going around the planet, destabilizing, restructuring, and privatizing all of the little pockets that it hadn't already destabilized, restructured, and privatized. And it did that in the Middle East for a long time. It's still doing it in the Middle East to a certain degree, but that was the first place to do it. And it did it in the former Soviet bloc. And it has been doing it more and more in the West, in the heart of the global capitalist empire. And I think what happened somewhere around 2015, 2016 is this populist backlash started gathering, right? And this is what led to Brexit and what led to the right populist parties rising up in Europe. And I believe it's inevitably what got Donald Trump elected. I don't think Donald Trump is a populist hero. I don't think he's going to, lead a populist revolution, but I think he became a figurehead for this populist backlash against the hegemony and the spread of global capitalism. And so when Brexit happened and when Trump got elected, it finally got, global capitalism's attention and said, whoa, we got a populist backlash on our hands here, and we need to quash it and we need to put it down. And the last 4 years, what we've been experiencing is global capitalism, quashing this populist backlash.
But people would, when they look at Trump, they look at his followers as being on the right. So why would the right be trying to squash capitalism?
Well, it's kind of complicated. A lot of folks on the right don't think they are, and I get comments like this on my pieces all of the time. They don't see it as capitalism. They call it communism and socialism, and it's not. Here comes the second part of my spiel, right? And this gets a little heady for folks. So I'll try to go slow.
I'll try to keep up.
Yeah, stay with me. Capitalism. I'm one of these old lefties that I don't think capitalism is an inherently evil monster, that appeared, out of nowhere that should be. I think capitalism was an incredibly useful tool to free us from despotism. Right? Hundreds of years ago, the things were what they were because the king said they were, because the church said they
Feudalism.
were. Because God said they were. Well, no, despotism. It's
Okay.
it's it's a question of
Right.
how
Yeah.
it's a
The,
question of how values get established, and
right.
this is also interesting for us as artists, because we came in at the tail end of a time when the whole old authority of artists was crumbling and dissolving, which was also despotic, when you had a small elite group of experts at the top of the arts who decided what was good and what wasn't good and what was quality, and
We
so
still
on.
have that in some way.
Well, what we have though, Hugo, is a simulation of that,
Okay, sure.
right? It's a simulation of that. Just like we still have the simulation of an aristocracy, but we don't actually have an aristocracy because despotism is gone. All right, the king doesn't get to say, what's valuable and what isn't valuable. People can believe in whatever kind of God they want. The church isn't running around persecuting people, as heretics. That despotic world is over, and capitalism is what got us out of it, right? Because what capitalism does, and the reason it's really an amazing tool ideologically, I'm not talking about just the economic system, I'm talking ideologically. What it does is it goes into despotic societies and it decodes all of those despotic values, all right? And it decodes them and it turns them all into one single value, which is exchange value.
Okay.
Right?
When you
And
say decodes, you mean, what do you mean?
what I mean is it takes the power away from the church. It strips the church of its power to say this is good and this is evil.
Okay.
I mean, the church can still do that, but the church doesn't get to run society anymore.
Right. It's not the final authority. Right.
Capitalism runs society, right?
Yeah.
The king, they've still got a royalty in Great Britain, but they don't get to run society. Capitalism runs society. And capitalism has one value, and it's exchange value. Everything is basically a commodity, right? And when everything is a commodity, everything is essentially valueless, right? A plastic fork is basically the same object as Damien Hirst's diamond skull. The only difference is what those objects bring on the market.
And if you're in the desert and you need to eat, you'd probably be easier to do it with the fork than the skull.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely, but it has nothing to
And have
do
more
with
value.
absolutely, but you're talking about use value, but
Right.
it has
Okay.
nothing to do with the way values are established in our societies, right?
Okay.
For example, I can believe I can adopt any religion I want under the capitalist system, right? I can be a Christian, right? I can say that I'm a Christian, but I can't actually live according to Christian values, right? Because the society won't let me do that, right? In the same way, you see a conflict between global capitalism and Islam, fundamentalist Islam, because fundamentalist Islam is trying to actually order society according to its religious values.
Like a theocracy.
Yeah, and capitalism is absolutely fine with you believing anything you want. You can be a Muslim, a Christian, or a Satanist. It doesn't matter to capitalism as long as the actual values that you're living are capitalist values. As long as you're buying, you're consuming, and you're paying your taxes and so on.
So if I wanted to live like Christ and give away all of my things, that wouldn't be okay.
Oh no, it's fine. It's absolutely fine, but the society will destroy you.
Right. Okay.
Right?
Got it.
Yeah, for doing that. And if you go and try to throw the money lenders out of the temple, the police will arrest you.
And they did that to Christ as well.
Yes, exactly. So all I'm trying, you were asking, how does capitalism decode these values? Well, it strips power away from the despots who had it, and it transfers that power to the marketplace. All right. In essence, ideologically rendering everything a commodity. And now let's get back to the populism. You asked about, Trump supporters and the right wing, and why is the right wing
Right.
against capitalism? I think that you're seeing all of this right wing populist backlash against global capitalism because a lot of these people want to hang on to their traditional values. A lot of them are religious, or they have other traditional values. Some of them are, racists. As people are relentlessly saying. It's I think you've got a huge mass of the working classes who are not ready to live in a global capitalist world where nothing really means anything and everybody is basically a commodity.
So that's you had talked, and you've talked, and I guess I've read in some of your writings about the real backlash was against neoliberalism, which, and we had a guest on last week, faculty Professor Taylor, his first name Clarence Taylor, who used to teach at CUNY Graduate Center in Baruch, and he was talking about neoliberalism and its rise during the Reagan years, and of course, kind of really, came into its own under the Clinton administrations, and to some degree the Obama administrations. So, but again, it's this idea that the left and the right are almost the same thing, except for maybe names and a few of the things that they support. Does that play any role in this as well?
Well, yeah, sure. You're talking about neoliberalism, which is basically laissez-faire capitalism. Yeah,
Okay.
it's basically, and again, I'm not a scholar or an expert on this, but the short version of neoliberalism is laissez-faire capitalism. It's get the government out of the way and let capitalism do its thing. And I think that's I think this is basically it's the problem for me anyway, and I think it's a problem for a lot of people. When you let an economic system and a powerful machine like capitalism not just be your economic engine, but to structure the values of your entire society, this is what you end up with. All this machine knows how to do is strip values off of things and render things commodities that can be traded. Yeah, that's all it knows how to do. I just want to point out that yes, most of the populist backlash that's been going on for the last 4 years has been from the right, but it's not exclusively from the right. I mentioned that Bernie is the one that drew me into this gig, and I think the huge support that was behind Bernie in 2016, and to a degree, trying to be behind him again this year. All that support, that's left populism. Jeremy Corbyn in the UK, is a socialist, and it's left populism, right? And we saw what happened to them. Corbyn was destroyed by the media and the political establishment in the UK. And we saw what happened to Sanders as well. So I think this backlash is not exclusively right wing, but it is predominantly right.
When you were talking before and you mentioned a few names, I'm trying to think of your day-to-day life. It seems like you consume a great deal of media, right, in order to be on top of this and be able to write as effectively as you do, at least to communicate your ideas. So is this your day-to-day life? You wake up and you proceed to eat up whatever's on the front page?
Pretty much for the last 4 years. For the last 4 years. So yeah, that's basically what I've been doing is, one of my main focuses is propaganda. You mentioned, that I go after the media a lot, and I do. And I've been interested, forever. Back when I was writing for the stage, I've always been interested in how power controls people's minds.
Yeah, I was going to say Screw Machine Eye Candy. I remember that play, and seemed to be a lot about that, right? Controlling, in this case, what were game show participants, but by the host, and that was sadistic, to say the least.
Yeah, and even horse country,
Do you happen to have here?
yeah,
Another
yeah,
shameless promotion here.
which is probably the least blatantly political of my plays. But even horse country I mean, the entire event of horse country is kind of an experience of these guys on stage. I've always seen theater as church, where there's a couple of, priests or shaman, that are up on the stage and everybody's the congregation. And, basically what they're doing is they're kind of using the machine that gets used in the theater, to impregnate us with ideology and values and what have you. And they're kind of using that machine and showing us the machine as they use it, in the hopes that we become more aware of it. But anyway, I was going to say something about the corporate media, and I forgot what it was.
Do you want me to? It's 1:28 here in New York, so I can, if you'd like, I can do the station break now, and it gives you a minute to think.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you are watching and listening to what's going on here on LaGuardia Radio, WLGR. I'm your host, Hugo Fernandez, and my guest today is CJ Hopkins, who is a satirist, expat, American who lives in sunny Berlin and produces a blog, probably pretty much daily to some degree, right, or weekly, called consentfactory.com. And by the way, one thing I did when I was going to mention when we talked about the novel, Zone 23 is a dystopia. And I always wonder, why don't people ever write utopias anymore? Why does it always have to be dys? And maybe you can answer that having written one.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I don't know. Can you imagine a utopia at this point, given our circumstances?
Well, my thinking is always, and this is the problem, of course, when you start thinking about, if you took all the good ideas and employed them, maybe things would be a little bit better. But of course, then you get into the value, what's good and bad, which is is impossible. But certainly one person's notion of take a little bit, like run the place on solar energy or whatever it is, and get rid of armies and all these other kinds of whatever notions we would believe. What might the world look like? I mean, having said that, I'm sure there's a way to off the rails, but it's just a thought that ran through my head, because again, Zone 23. I will admit, and one of the problems is that you sent me the galleys, or whatever you want to call it, the PDF, right at the tail end of teaching. I teach in the summer. I've been teaching 2 writing intensives where you spend most of your time reading the work of student work, which is not easy sometimes if people struggle with grammar and spelling and things like that. So and I usually save that August, if I'm going to do any reading at all, for some whatever a guilty pleasure, maybe some book about baseball or something. And here comes Zone 23, and I start reading it. And, I can't remember what I'd said, but it was like, William S. Burroughs and Hunter S. Thompson meet the Marquis de Sade or something. There was some rough stuff in there, and I'm not even sure if I ever finished it, but it was dark.
You didn't get to the happy ending.
There's that. Yeah, obviously. Maybe there was light at the end of the tunnel, or is that you putting me on?
Putting me on just a little bit.
Okay, so what I was going to say, we're in the second half of the show, and this is where we kind of get into the meat of things, if we haven't gotten there already, and we have in some ways. But this is a unique opportunity to have, I think, a pretty let's say informed American living outside of America who's watching what's going on in America, and it certainly has an impact on where you live as well. How does Europe and or Americans living abroad see what's going on and what they believe is going to happen or not happen in the next 24 hours, actually, because the election begins tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. in some places. So thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, technically it's already begun, right? Because there's been a lot of early voting and
yes.
What have you. Germany's a funny place because, again, getting back to my spiel about, the global capitalist empire. I mean, Germany is Germany, and it's very much it's very German, but it's
Which
very
means,
much. Sorry.
which means,
Well,
when you say it's very German.
people eat Eisbein, and we drink a lot of beer, and and so on. But it's very much part of the heart of the global capitalist empire. So in terms of ideology and in terms of media, in terms of people's perspective, it's really not all that different. I think that the liberal sections of Germany are pretty equivalent to the liberal territories in the United States. The conservative areas are pretty equivalent to the conservative areas. And to an extent, the details are different, but it's my experience in Great Britain and my experience in France. I mean, it really is a globalized world. I think people in Germany, there are people who just hysterically, fanatically hate Donald Trump. They have no real idea why they hate him so much, but they just feel that somehow he's Hitler, or
I was going to say despotism.
A Russian intelligence asset, or he's some kind of evil malignant force that's going to completely destroy Western democracy. And it's kind of irrational if you look at what the man has actually done. And I encourage your audience to read Matt Taibbi's piece that just came out today, where he points out that if you look at what Trump actually, has done, this big, scary, fascistic monster, he was handed all of the tools that a fascist would ever want to create fascism and despotism. And what he's done is he spent his 4 years sitting in the White House whining, on Twitter, because the media is taking a big poop on him. He really actually hasn't. He's one of my articles, I think I titled it the worst literal Hitler ever. I mean, this guy, he stinks as Hitler. He's been sold to us as Hitler, and I've used this many, many times in my Consent Factory pieces. It's just like, when is this guy going to start Hitlering already? They've been, the
so
media
you're saying that we should actually be grateful for his ineptitude, the folks on the let's say the left. Let's call me the left.
Well, what I'm trying to point at, I think, is just the reality, of this guy.
What about so let's talk about, what about the Supreme Court? Now it's a 6-3, group 6 that would certainly turn over something like Roe v. Wade, or the Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, which are things that people are concerned about here in the United States. And that's been effective, but that's, of course, because the Senate is Republican and could make that happen.
And all of these issues are important. Hugo, Trump has also deregulated a bunch of environmental stuff that is going to cause, immense damage.
Yes.
And he's done a bunch of other things that people like you and me don't like, which Republicans pretty much always do when they're in office. And then when the Democrats get in office, they pretty much always undo some of these things. And all of these things are important, but they're not what I'm focusing on. All right. What I'm on is, for the last 4 years, I mean, starting before the guy was even elected, for the last 4 years, the entire power structure of the Western world, both in Germany, this is what you asked me about, I've got it, both in Germany, in the United Kingdom, in France, pretty much everywhere in the Western world, as well as in the United States, they've been relentlessly bombarding us for 4 years with propaganda. It's official propaganda.
And they being the media?
The media, the intelligence communities, and the political establishment. I mean, basically, in simple terms, what happened in 2016 is a bozo got elected president without their permission. That's what happened.
I see.
Right? is seriously, look at it. There is a process that presidents go through to get vetted and approved and given permission to run for president.
Anointed.
Yeah, well, no, it's not. It's not anointed. It's not anointed. But they get approved. Hillary Clinton was approved. Barack Obama was approved. The Bushes were approved. These people went through the process. Donald Trump crashed the party, right? He was a bozo that came from right field, yeah, and nobody gave him permission to be president, and he won. Yeah, so you've got this totally unauthorized bozo who has become the president of the United States right after Brexit happened, which was never supposed to happen in the first place, right? And the reaction is we have been bombarded for 4 years with nonstop official propaganda. You said who from? Yes, from the corporate media, also from the intelligence agencies, and from the entire political establishment. Okay, not the Republicans who you have because he's actually sitting in the White House. But if you look at how many so-called Republicans, neoconservatives, actually opposed Trump, vehemently opposed Trump, and some of them still oppose Trump, it's the entire political establishment and, yes, the corporate media. We've been bombarded with this propaganda for 4 years, and it basically has two aspects. One aspect is this guy's a Russian spy, which is just preposterous.
Which you've been accused of as well, right?
Yeah, of course. But this is you mentioned that your wife watches Rachel Maddow.
Right.
This was for 2.5 years. This was beaten into people's heads as if this was a vaguely rational thing to say. That Donald Trump.
Well, there's certainly concerns. I mean, when you have somebody who fails to release their financial records, then you come to find out that they owe a lot of money and they had dealings with foreign nationals. You could see that you wouldn't have been hired for a federal position with that type of background. So you could see how it's plausible.
No.
You don't see how it's plausible.
No,
okay.
It was ridiculous from the word go.
Okay.
And it blew up. When did it blow up? In 2018 is when the whole Mueller report finally came in, and it completely blew up. It was ridiculous from the beginning. The whole thing was started with an ex-spy's fake dossier that was commissioned by the Clinton camp. The whole thing stank from the very beginning, and we were bombarded with this for years. And so that's half of it. Half of it was, Trump is, a Russian intelligence asset. And the other half of it is he's also literally Hitler. Okay.
Right.
These are the two things.
Well, I mean, people, the way he's treated immigrant families, separating them, and the way those children have been treated, which now, of course, I forgot what the number is, over 500, where we can't find the parents.
Yeah,
you could see how people would draw that corollary.
Yeah, no argument. I think his policies, specifically the policies that were developed, I forget by which one of his henchmen, developed the policies that were aimed at specifically splitting families up as a deterrent. Yeah, exactly. It was Jeff Sessions and maybe the Miller guy. I'm not sure. But of course, this is, horrible. At the same time, I don't have it in front of me, but if you look at the charts of the people who have actually been deported and compare the Obama administration.
Yes, the numbers are higher.
To the Trump administration. Yeah, the Obama deportations dwarf Trump's deportations. And it's also in my pieces. If the links are there, people will read them. I mean, they were publishing photographs of kids in cages that were taken during the Obama administration,
right?
and screaming at Trump about them. Look, this is the position that I've been in for 4 years. I'm sitting here defending Donald Trump. Right?
Willingly, I did say I was going to invoke the Pope of Greenwich Village lie detector test on you, which is like, you basically you're telling me you're not a Putin stooge, right? That's what you're saying. What you have said.
I missed. What's this lie detector test?
If you're lying to me, your cousin Guido dies of slow stomach cancer, right?
I
I think
as
you
a
remember
general
that scene, right?
I vaguely remember it. As a general policy, I never deny accusations. But look, I'm glad we ended up here because here's my point. This is the position that I've been in, and a lot more prominent journalists have been in and are still in. And again, I mentioned Greenwald, Taibbi, Aaron Mate, various other people. We're put in the position we're not Donald Trump supporters. All the people that I just named, none of us actually like Donald Trump or support Donald Trump. But because we care about the truth and
Right.
actual facts, we're put in a position where we, are painted as a bunch of, far-right extremists because we're pointing out that this propaganda that we've been barraged with is absolutely ridiculous.
Okay. You managed to not tell me what you think is going to happen. But I will just say it's 1:43, so we're moving into the last quarter hour. Dr. Riccio, the program director, she's manning the Twitch stream. I'm wondering if there's any questions coming in. So I'm gonna just let her know that she should feel free to send them in as we move in there. So, given everything you're watching, I mean, I know your focus is mostly on how the media is behaving, or the intelligence community is behaving, or how the folks in power are behaving, or in and out of power are behaving. I'm not saying do you have a crystal ball, but what are your thoughts about the election?
Well, I have a couple of thoughts. I just, my latest Consent Factory column was the last days of the Trumpian right. And I have believed all along, and I continue to believe, that the establishment cannot allow him to serve another 4 years. So I have a really hard time believing that he is going to serve out a second term. What's going to happen tomorrow and in the days and weeks ahead, I really have no idea. I've got kind of a bad feeling. It has been set up on both sides, a contested election.
Right.
And I don't know, we don't have time for me to do my whole spiel on this, but propaganda that we've been getting from the establishment for 4 years is that any day going to go full Hitler and declare martial law and, bring his underground Putin Nazi army out, and just Nazify the United States. Feels like if there is a contested election, we're looking at a real contest of power, where people are trying to force Trump out of office. Now, I don't know. I have a bad feeling, but if it makes people feel any better, I'm usually wrong about presidential elections. Trump's actually going to win the thing in votes.
I find that hard to believe, but
well, all the polls say
it all depends, I guess, when you stop counting, right?
You remember 2016?
Yeah.
The polls, I mean, Trump had, I don't know, they gave him like a 1% chance of winning or something. It was, Newsweek printed up the Madam President cover. Everybody was absolutely sure that Clinton was going to win. And a few guys like Michael were actually going around the country and looking at the rallies and talking to people and looking at the actual support on the ground. And Michael Moore was one of them too. And they said, well, it's kind of weird because what we're seeing here on the ground doesn't really match what the polls are saying.
Right.
And I'm not there. I'm all the way over here in Berlin. So, I'm just going by what I see on the social media and the regular, in the establishment media. But it kind of feels like that again, Hugo. It feels like all of the polls and all of the experts are saying one thing, and I'm seeing a huge amount of actual on the ground Trump support.
Well, the first of all, it's more people are voting. It seems like than ever before. I think than what the numbers were that more people have voted now than I believe in previous elections. But and this is like early voting and mailing in and these other things. The question becomes what happens on the day of the election, who shows up to vote, and how things are counted. I mean, I remember something this morning about that. The Biden's numbers were coming back. I mean, they were almost at double digits as far as possibly defeating, Trump, the president. And so it will be. It's going to be a close horse race. I'm hoping, though I don't know if it'll happen, if Texas or even Florida would go for Biden, though they seem to think the bellwether is Arizona and how Arizona votes. At least that's what my wife is telling me. And of
Okay.
course, and what she listens, I mean, she's close to this. So I'm, what do I know? I fall asleep uh, right about the beginning of Rachel Maddow. And I spend most of my time correcting papers and answering emails. So I don't really know what's going on.
Well,
But I guess I'm concerned about what you talked about. I mean, one of the things that we've always touted is this easy transition of power, and it seems that this is what seems that's at stake at this point: is can we keep from tearing ourselves apart if that becomes the case, or if it isn't the case? Either way, when people start saying the fight is, we're not going to stop fighting. What does that mean? At least what that means never ever. Uh, and that was like the title of some email I got from the right this morning. So there are a lot of concerns. By the way, since it is we got about 11 minutes, and part of that's going to be some music. I want to give you an opportunity to talk about anything that you have working for yourself. I've got a message here. Okay, so you should feel free to talk about your future for about 8 minutes.
I'll talk about the future. Maybe I'll talk. Maybe I'll bend it back to what we were just talking about. My future. Some good things are happening. Some people in Germany are interested in maybe having a look at some of my books and my essays and what have you, and that'll be nice. The future kind of depends on where things go from here. And there's a couple of things that, we really need to get through tomorrow and the rest of the week, and however long it takes for this election to work itself out. I mean, Hugo, cities are boarding up stores. They're boarding
In
up.
Europe, well, I know Germany is supposed to go into a lockdown, right? Four-week lockdown.
We're in a lockdown. I'm talking about cities in the United States.
Oh, right.
They're boarding up the windows of stores. It's I don't want to say, I hate to say too much, but I just have a bad feeling about what's coming. As I said, I don't see any way that the establishment allows 4 more years of Trump. I mean, can you imagine this? 4 more years of
Well, my
Trump?
concern is, yeah, I'm concerned about what remains of his presidency and the kind of damage he could do in 2 months. But yeah, if he won again, what he could do in 4 years is frightening. And then, of
Well,
course, the question is, would he ever leave office?
can I ask you though? What specifically is frightening? What is
Well,
it?
the things
What,
that I'm not talking about, and for I mean, it does concern me that people, the far right, are emboldened by whether he chooses to admonish them or otherwise, or tacitly support them. But no, the things you had talked about before, the what's happening with the judiciary, what's happening environmentally, those kinds of things are things that you were saying before you can reverse, but scientists have certainly said there are some things that we may be beyond fixing or reversing. So again, to have somebody, for example, who does not support protecting the environment for 4 more years, that's frightening enough for me. I mean, remember, and that somehow that got lost in this debate, which was climate change. I don't know what's been going on the weather in Berlin, but here in the United States, hurricane season. Remember, you and I grew up in South Florida in a time there was a 20-year period where there were no hurricanes, and then came Hurricane Andrew. This year, there were more hurricanes than ever, particularly hitting in the Gulf Coast. But that has kind of been, there is some, once in a while they talk about it, but there are so many other greater, or what people believe to be greater concerns to talk about. So that's my fear is, the kind of damaged, usually you call him a lame duck president, but again, Donald Trump has always behaved in a way where he's, kind of a fearlessness, not worrying about, answering for any of the things he does politically or presidentially, should I say. So those are my concerns.
I'll tell you what my fears are. Looking back at the last 4 years, right, and seeing everything that the U.S. intelligence agencies have done, everything that the Democratic Party has done, everything that the corporate media has done for the last 4 years, culminating in where we've been this year. The entire country is locked down, and it's a little bit late to get into this argument, but locked down because of a virus that maybe we can agree is at least no more dangerous than the virus that swept the world in 1968, when we didn't lock down the entire world and force everybody to wear masks outside. So we've got like quasi-totalitarian measures, emergency measures that have been applied this year. We've also got widespread civil unrest and rioting. I'm sorry to disappoint my fellow comrades on the left, but it ain't the Nazis. The widespread rioting and destruction in the cities it's not a neo-Nazi movement. It's the Black Lives Matter folks. And this is,
again, people would contest that and say that there are those folks who probably even, I wouldn't even say provoke, but it goes back to some of the behavior of the FBI during the 60s against the protest movements and, provoking situations or that then escalate into something else. And you're right. I don't know if we do have time for this. You may have to come back when we could, because I believe, like you believe, that it won't be over tomorrow, and we're going to be going through a period of time until there is an inauguration where things are going to become difficult. So I would love to invite you back to tell us what you think of what's happening next. But like I said, we've only got a couple of minutes, so I don't know if I hate to interrupt you, but any last words you'd like to say?
Happy to come back. You were asking me about the future, and
right, I did. Yeah, you got a minute.
The future will depend on what happens in the next week or two with the election and the peaceful transfer of power, and it will also depend on what happens with this global new normal that the empire is imposing on all of us. How am I doing on time?
Yeah, another minute.
I got another minute.
Yeah, it could be another minute.
Yeah, so you'll have to have me back on, because it's not enough time to dig into all of it. But Hugo, what I see is this year is the culmination, of 4 years of this war on populism, and what has been created is a situation where people are scared to death, furious. The society is completely polarized. And here we are, and the establishment is about to get rid of, finally, this symbol, this unauthorized president who has become a symbol for this populist backlash. And we'll see what happens. We'll see if it
Well, I
works.
hope if they do it decisively. So if you've been watching, the show is What's Going On. I'm your host, Hugo Fernandez, and my guest today has been C.J. Hopkins, who's worn many hats, but he's currently a satirist, expatriate living in Berlin, sunny Berlin, and writes the blog, the consentfactory.com. These are a couple of compilations of some of his essays over the last 4 years, dealing with the Trump years, we'll call them. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for being on.
It's been a pleasure.
And I want you back. And Mr. Pope, take us out the way you brought us in. Thanks for watching and listening.